Okay, and here we are. This is Dr. Amber Wolf and my friend David Collis. Hi, David.
Hi, Amber.
How are things in Tucson?
It's been hot and muggy.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we have lots of drama in the sky. Lots of drama in the sky.
interesting. Well, we actually are having a rainy day here today, and it's only 70, which is, it's very nice. It's cool. It feels gentle today. So for me, I like moving in these days, and yeah, so I'm happy to be doing that with you. And I want to say to the people that are listening that I met David and his beautiful wife, Deb, last February when I was in Tucson for a Crying event, and I stayed at their wonderful Airbnb. And it was just Spirit's plan that we should connect. And David was just finishing up the book, Interviewing Jesus, when I was there in February. And so we talked about it a little bit, but now we're going to talk about it some more because it's done. Yay. And congratulations on that. And yeah, it's just great to go on to Amazon and see, ta-da, there it is. It's, beyond concept, it's manifested itself in reality now.
That's true.
So let's talk for a little. I want you to talk and tell the people that are watching the shorter version of how you came to write this book. But what I found was particularly interesting was the time that you spent doing these sacred circles around the world, because I believe that all the things that we do in our life leads us to the next thing. So I'm sure that that was part of what your path was that led you to writing this book. Is that right?
That is one component of the story.
Yeah.
So, and that was I'm going to say it's the only component of the story, but it is a component of the story.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So if you would talk about, just let it flow. Talk about the story. How did the book come into being? And who are you to be writing about Jesus?
Okay. I finally reached a point in my life where I felt that it was very important to put back into the world the information and the knowledge that I have gained throughout my life. And I have done a lot of research. I have attended a lot of lectures. I have gone to a number of classes, et cetera, et cetera. And I was involved in the sacred circles. And then I also was involved with creating what I refer to as mystery symbols. So it was a whole artwork. And after the course of all of this work and all of this study and traveling around the world, I just felt that this was now time. And one of the things that I ended up doing was presenting a 4-part lecture series at the Gospel of Thomas, on the Gospel of Thomas. And in that particular lecture series, on the second lecture, I ended up giving a lecture on the type of person that would say those very kind of thorny and prickly and difficult sayings. And then on the flip side was the type of, let's say, the community that would be in receivership of that information. So I ended up putting a little profile together of both the person and the community. So then after that, I started to realize that that was a really good way of kind of presenting information about Jesus. And then I just kind of took that and just went a little bit further with it and then really kind of explored the New Testament more.
So let me ask you this, why Jesus? I mean, there are lots of teachers that are not alive now that you could have written about. Why Thomas, why Jesus?
Well, I just have been involved with Christianity throughout most of my life. And I have gone through various phases of the Christian experience, whether it be the Christian mystics or the Pentecostal movement or the Catholics or the Episcopalians. There's just been a broad range of Christianity that I've been involved in. I have made pilgrimages to various cathedrals and to missions and have attended a lot of church services. But I also investigated Gnosticism. And so that was also part of my journey. And I just felt that there was this information about Christianity that I ended up understanding and knowing more about than about any other of the other religions and other man's kind of spiritual disciplines. So it's not that I don't know the others, it's just that I just seem to have a more intimate understanding of this material.
So, okay, so there are a lot of people that read a lot of books about a lot of spiritual stuff, but you had all these experiences and decided that what did you feel needed to come forward from that?
When I started to do the research on the book, I started to see Jesus in a new light. So I felt like I wanted to present something new about him. And this is an ancient living tradition. It's a 2,000-year-old tradition. And almost everybody that comes to understanding Christianity, or even comes to understand Jesus, understands Jesus from the Christian perspective.
Okay.
What I started to realize is that there was another perspective, and it was that perspective that I wanted to explore. And it had to do more about his humanity and his own spiritual progression.
So when you say, would you explain that a little more, his humanity and his spiritual progression? Because we know that Jesus was a man, a physical man, but what does that mean, his humanity? And as far as his spiritual progression, wasn't he the anointed one from the beginning?
Yes, see, that's part of the issue that I found very fascinating, and that is there is a very archetypal, symbolic, metaphorical nature of the way that we perceive Jesus. So if we now take that away and we say, if he's not the Son of God and he actually is human, how did he move through his life? How did he live his life? What kind of experiences did he have? And what were his inspirations to reach the point that he was able to conduct his ministry? And those were the questions that were most important to me. Who was this man? What kind of experiences did he have? What type of inspirations did he have in his own life to get him to the point where he can actually do what he did? If you remove the theological points of view and you remove the archetypal point of view, which seems to encapsulate Jesus in one particular manner, we only see it from that perspective.
Right.
So what happens when you recognize that he was a man developing and growing and learning? What was he learning?
That's a whole new concept. That's completely unlike anything that's ever been presented before. I think that's, for me, one of the most exciting things about your book is that Jesus the man.
That's right.
And how we don't look at that. We look at, the anointed one or the teacher or the Son of God, but what about Jesus the man? One of the things I found fascinating from the excerpts of your book that I read is that you're having a conversation with him just like we're having. It doesn't seem that it doesn't seem mystical, and it doesn't seem ultra spiritual. It seems just like a real conversation with a man that is using words that we can identify with and thoughts that we can identify with. Even when he talks about miracles, he talks about them in a really understandable and grounded way. So would you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The point that I wanted to do, the point of the book was to try to demystify Jesus. And I was not interested in all of the kind of the metaphors and the symbols that are associated with Jesus.
Okay.
And if we look at Christianity, we understand it that Jesus was the Son of God who was a sacrificial lamb, and he died for the sins of mankind.
Right.
What I found interesting is when I flipped the question around, the question was, what was it that you were attempting to accomplish? Is it the Christian version or is it not the Christian version? And so to me, I felt like the most immediate way to get into and to penetrate some of these ideas was to have a conversation and take the kind of the glow or the halo or the presence about something that's about God off that pedestal and bring him down as if he were standing in front of me. The other way that I was imagining it is I pictured myself when I was writing the book, if I were a videographer, if I was making a documentary, what would I see Jesus doing? What would I see Jesus say? Or what would I hear Jesus saying? What would I smell? What would be the atmosphere? Would I be fearful? Would I be joyful? What would be all the different other elements that make up somebody's life? And that became the key for me. And I call that the nuts and bolts of Jesus's life. What were the basic issues of his life?
Like his family and the culture and the politics and all of that.
My research took me into exploring Roman history, Greek history, Egyptian history, Jewish history, the religions of all of them, even the religions of ancient Mediterranean religion. So I looked at this from a very wide perspective, and I wanted to recreate the setting as close as I can get it and put Jesus back into that particular setting and saying, these are his sayings, and this is the setting. So what can I now make from both of these?
So talk a little bit, if you would, about the sayings, because I know that there are many sayings attributed to Jesus, and I know in your book that you have a lot of them. And how did that part of the book come about?
Okay, so it kind of goes back to the issue with the Gospel of Thomas and the lectures that I did for that 4-part lecture series. Okay. So in the Gospel of Thomas, there are 114 sayings of Jesus, or 114 sayings that are attributed to Jesus.
Right.
There is no birth, there is no ministry, there are no miracles, there's no death, there's no resurrection. However, you do have the same cast of characters in the Gospel of Thomas. So you see Mary Magdalene, you see Peter, you see Thomas. And when I decided that I wanted to know something about Jesus in a much more in-depth manner, I decided to look at his sayings that are presented in the New Testament Gospel and in the Gospel of Thomas to kind of do a psychological profile of him. And so I compiled a master catalog of 25 pages of his sayings.
That must be hundreds of sayings.
There's quite a bit. And he has short sayings, and he has parables that are long and short. So he has this wide variety of saying. From there, I started to realize that what Jesus is telling me through his sayings was autobiographical. He was telling me something about his life experiences. Now, the question became, does Jesus know his wisdom because he read books or codices or scrolls, or was he just absolutely really adept at being observant? And the issue became that Jesus had to have been able to arrive at the conclusions that he arrived at, 1, because of experiences, and 2, because he was a genius, a spiritual genius, and 3, because he was highly observant. And 3, things were happening to him of which he is talking about himself. So the big aha moment I had was when I realized that Jesus's parables and sayings are autobiographical. He's using his own life experiences and his own life story to explain very deep spiritual principles. And that was a part of it, the aha moment that I had.
Yeah, I can see why you would say that, because we've never looked at he and his life that way. We never looked at him as the author.
That's correct. We just think that he's a channeler, and then he's just channeling the Father's words.
Right.
We don't recognize the fact that he's actually a poet. And as all artists, and I'm an artist, we struggle with the words that, or our art. And so the question that I had was, how much of this information that Jesus is telling us, is it extemporaneously? Is he just kind of talking off the cuff? Or is he actually developing some of these longer parables? And to me, it became evident that there were moments where he had to act very quickly because situations were coming to him and confronting him that he had to say very quick sayings. Then there were the other types of teachings in which he had to stop and contemplate the message. So the setup, the whole context of the
Right.
story.
Okay.
And that had to take some time for him to think through how you set it up, how you move from the beginning to the middle to the end, and finally arrive at the punchline. I felt that took time.
Okay. Might an example of that, because I have never thought of him as, you know, putting any thought behind what he was going to say. I agree that we think of him as a channeler. This stuff just was coming through him, or similar to a channeler. But when you say that about how he would be in society, the stoning of the prostitute and the famous saying, "Let ye who among you is not sinned be the first to cast a stone," that happened in the moment, I'm assuming.
Correct. That's correct.
But then something like the Sermon on the Mount, that's lengthy and it's a deep teaching and it goes on and on. Are you saying that something like that he would have prepared for and gathered the audience and been in a place where he could speak to a lot of people that could hear him, etc.?
Okay, there's so many parts to this. It's going to take some while to unpack that one. Okay, so there's a lot of things that Jesus was doing while he was on ministry, in which he would walk into a situation and then change the dynamic of that situation, like confronting the people that wanted to stone a woman for prostitution.
Right.
Jesus was very bold and very courageous, and he recognized when something was wrong and how he wanted to fit in and kind of reconfigure the dialogue at that moment. And he was a master of that. He was constantly walking into situations. Get up, you're healed. Start walking.
Yeah.
You know, let me spit in my hand and, you know, rub my spit in the mud into your eyes. I mean, he seems to have this very direct and immediate experience with the person that he's addressing. Okay, so that seems to be very immediate. It's one-on-one. Other people, there's a larger audience in which he is performing something that everybody gets to watch. When you get into the Sermon on the Mount, my estimation is that that's a compilation of sayings. That it wasn't probably one moment where he was up on the Mount. It was probably these are the sayings that Jesus was developing and saying over the course of his ministry, and finally, you know, it all kind of got compiled into say just one moment.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I think that's a compile, just like I did. I cataloged all of his sayings, and I think the Sermon on the Mount is more of a compilation of these particular types of aphorisms. You know,
Okay.
blessed are the peacemakers,
Right.
for them called the sons of God. Turn the other cheek. If someone takes your give them your coat as well. Those types of sayings. And that is very consistent with the type of things that Jesus is saying. They're short aphorisms. They're not long, lengthy explanations. They're not storytelling in that sense. His parables are like the parable of the sower. He goes out, he throws the seeds down on the ground. Some go on good soil,
Right.
some so on. Okay, that's one. There's another one about the man who was kind of robbing the owner of the estate that he was managing of money, and the owner calls him on it. So, you know, it's time for you to pay all the money that you owe me. And then that's a very lengthy story. And then at the end of the story, the man turns around and is demanding money from the people that had borrowed from him, and it's like the equivalent of 5 cents. Whereas the owner of the estate, you know, forgave him of the $1,000 that were owed. So he's kind of developing some very complicated stories about comparing between large and small, and there are other issues, but those are long sayings.
Okay.
They're
Okay.
teachings.
Well, thank you for making that differentiation. That's yeah, because I hadn't thought in those terms. You know, you've talked about being a student and a researcher and a writer about Jesus. Tell me, what do you feel a presence, his presence, or some godly presence when you're doing this writing? Do you hear him? Do you feel him saying yes, no, maybe, or maybe more?
I seem to have been born with a God gene that's like quadruple the strength and the power. So
okay.
that there, it always seems like there's a presence around me and I'm always aware of it. Okay, so
Yes.
that's one aspect. But when it came to this particular subject and this particular project, there were moments where there was a hyper realism to that experience. So there was moments, well, let's just say this, almost on a daily basis, I felt an urge to get up and write every day. And it
Yeah.
wasn't just, oh, you know, I think I might not write today because I don't know what I'm saying. No, it's like you have to get up and write. There was no way of me not doing it.
Yeah.
If
Well,
there
I
was,
remember that from being there, at your house. It was I didn't see you all day. You were writing all the time. And
yeah,
it wasn't like, oh, I've got to, you were just pulled, drawn.
right.
So,
So there was
yeah.
an urgent, so there was that level of urgency. There were times when I felt like I was asking questions like what we were talking about. And I just remember, I am now telling you things that I learned, but prior to learning those, I was still working through some of those issues. So I now know, but before that, I didn't necessarily have the same feelings or compulsion or insight or understanding as I
Right.
do now. So things were kind of murky. They were kind of emerging out of this. So I was doing a little bit of automatic writing in some of these issues as well. And it's like words just started to just flow out onto the page, and questions just started to flow out on the page. And answers would start to come to me in ways that I was actually quite surprised with because I wasn't necessarily thinking in those terms. And then I started to connect things together that normally would not necessarily be connected together. And because I had done so much research just about the historical setting, I now can start putting myself back into Jesus's kind of mindset, what he was thinking about and in his settings, to then start realizing that this might be a plausible answer. So there was that. There was one more instance, and I think this is a really important one. When I was writing the gospel, when I was writing the chapter on John the Baptist, I was discussing the 40 days out in the desert. And so I got to the point where I was writing like, well, this was just kind of a generally like, I don't know, a week or two or something like that. So I really wasn't thinking of it as in 40 days. So I had completed that section of that part of the chapter. And after I was done, I sat down and had a cup of coffee. And I just got this overwhelming presence and sense that everything that I just wrote was wrong.
Oh, geez.
And then I had to go back and reinvestigate and assess the meaning of 40 days and what it would take to do that. So whether it was a full 40 days or whether it's a long period of time, all I can say is that there were things that Jesus needed to learn, and it was only through a very lengthy /40-day period of fasting to gather the information that he felt that was needed to move him from being a man who was in carpentry to a man who is now engaged in his ministry. And John the Baptist is the bridge between those two worlds. So
Okay.
John the Baptist is actually, I think, one of the best chapters in the book because it's bridging the two worlds Jesus knew before he started his ministry, and then John was the bridge into the ministry. So the question became, what did Jesus need from John? So
Do you feel that Jesus, we look at that as the biblical story of the 40 days in the desert is Jesus went there and he was tempted by the devil, and he said, "Get behind me." When I could give you the whole world, and these are my brief interpretation. So what you're saying sounds to me like that transformation that he was making from being this sort of person, everyday human, to a spiritual master, and raising his vibration, should we say, or, tuning into the energy of the earth, or clearing the last of his old residual karmic patterns, something. So a lot different than what we've been given to believe in the simplicity of the New Testament.
Exactly. And I think that that purging is part of his own personality that is being purged. So I think that there's an element of Jesus's personality that felt probably in an earlier age, and I can't say this for sure as when, but he must have felt that himself. He felt that he was so kind of arrogant that he felt that maybe ruling the world is something that he was capable of doing. And so that was part of his last temptations, is to get rid of that idea about himself. So again, it's the type of a purging of the ego.
Good
And
point.
then
Yeah.
and then the other aspect is just the nature of food. So believe it or not, when I cataloged all of Jesus' sayings into themes, Jesus talks about money the most and food the second most.
That's interesting.
Food is the second most important thing to Jesus when it comes to what he discusses. And lo and behold, you see it in his temptations, and you also see it in the Our Father prayer. Again, it's the food issue. Something's going on with food with Jesus. And I believe that he liked it a lot. I think he just had, I think he was like kind of a culinary artist. I think he really liked it. And that was probably one other aspects about himself that he went, oh my God, I'm going to have to give that up too.
Yeah, yeah.
Level, right? So now he's just kind of like going from door to door, so to speak, village to village, town to town, and he's being given what he's needed each day.
Not necessarily what he would want.
Right. He'd rather probably go into a particular restaurant and have wine, but that's not necessarily what he got.
Right, right.
He's thankful and grateful for the fact that he got something, which is that's a whole testament in and of itself about gratitude.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. So what kind of person are you writing towards? Who would enjoy your book?
Well, this is a loaded question too. So
thank you.
I love it. Thank you for just like, okay. So I looked at the field and I said, there are a lot of people out there like yourself that have been involved with Christianity and have decided that they needed to leave it. And for whatever reason, whether it just didn't fit their own spiritual journey, maybe you got hurt or damaged, or, there are a variety of reasons why people leave. And I felt like there's a new perspective of Jesus that I'm offering that would actually be beneficial to your own spiritual journey. And you don't necessarily have to leave the church to go there. Okay. There are other spiritual people that would like to probably know more about Jesus and what he did and what he accomplished. And what most of this book is about his own, it's the hero's journey. And it's how Jesus moves from one thing to another, to another, to another. And so I'm laying out all the things that he did so that he can accomplish the work that he felt he needed to engage in. And everybody that wants to go out and go do something in the world has to know some principles about engaging the world and from going from one part of yourself to another part of yourself. And there's that transition one must go through, both intellectually and spiritually and emotionally, to be able to step into the shoes of something much bigger than yourself. And so I explore that as the model that Jesus lived. So that idea about the journey and the evolution and the fact that he's learning things was more important to me than the idea that he's an archetype. It's just like, if you think about the nature of an archetype or even the symbol that he is, there's no progression in him. He just knows everything. He doesn't have to fight. He doesn't have to overcome any of the issues, and he doesn't get to learn any of his own lessons. It's like he's already preformed, like a preformed atom.
Right.
And the idea of the being preformed didn't resonate with me at all. I just totally rejected it and just said, hey, you know what? There's a guy going through an evolutionary process here, and this is what he probably is going through. So.
And so for those of us on the spiritual path, it is an evolutionary process. And what a unique and refreshing way to relate to this teacher as we can through your book. I know that now that we have the internet and recordings and things like that, we've been able to have an experience of the life of the Dalai Lama, a little bit less, say, Mother Teresa or Gandhi. But 2,000 years ago, yeah, tablets. So we don't really have that experience of what was his life like. And for me, that has been the most fascinating thing about your book, is that it's nothing like I was raised with. Nothing. And I am not, I stopped going to church when I was 15, to Catholic church when I was 15, but I never didn't like Jesus. I didn't like the politics of the church and the guilt and the shame that came along with it. But doesn't sound like there's any of that in what you're talking about. As a matter of fact, maybe the opposite, maybe the compassion, the gratitude, learning lessons instead of just being born dirty.
Right. Well, back then, there was an issue. People understood that there was kind of the basic instincts of mankind, and that if they start running wild, lust and ego and power, greed and money, that will just run away like the chariot horses. That's kind of the metaphor that they were using, and that it will just completely wipe people out. Okay, and it'll wipe you out. You're just going to be caught in this maelstrom of energy of which you're not going to be able to get out of. Okay. The other idea was that you had deeper spiritual principles, that they're going to have to be thought about, and they're going to have to be lived, and they're going to have to be applied. And so the marriage between the upper part of ourselves and the lower part of the selves is actually what Jesus was talking about. So that we're trying to eliminate those like base impulses of ourselves to allow the more of the divine aspects of ourselves to actually flourish. And so how do we allow that to happen? What kind of yard, what type of ground does that need to have? And how do we cultivate that? And so that's the way I look at it. That's what Jesus was working towards. How to take, not only for himself, but for others. How to overcome anger, how to overcome preconceptions, how to overcome judgment, and how to overcome just the basic violence that we have within ourselves, and to mitigate that through passion and through compassion and love and wisdom. So very different.
That's very different. Yeah, because the way that I learned it was, don't feel that. It's wrong. Instead of saying, we're all going to feel anger from time to time. The question is, how are you going to manage that? What are you going to do about it? What would you like to feel instead? So that's a completely different way of looking at it. It's actually a way that, makes sense anyway, because you can't pretend that you don't feel anger when, someone hurts you or steals something, or, hurts someone you love. Or
the wisdom of Jesus is heart to heart. It's an open heart to each other and the cultivation of each of the hearts. Does that mean that Jesus wasn't wise? Yeah, the man understood some very, very deep spiritual principles. But in the gospel, in the synoptic gospels, Jesus is portrayed conducting his ministry more through the heart than he is through the mind. In the Gospel of Thomas, it's all about the mind. So you kind of wonder where the heart is on that. And now these raise up all other issues, of which I may or may not explore, but there is, if you go too far into the head, you're going to lose yourself. Right. And if you go too far into your heart, you're going to be too emotional and romantic. And so there's kind of a blend between the serpent and the dove, right? And Jesus talks about that, integrating both the serpent and the dove. Wise as a snake and gentle as a dove. I mean, there's this balance between these two impulses. And he understood how to bridge those impulses.
Well, and if we're going to live as human beings, an extension of our spirit in this world, we have to have that balance.
Yeah. I'm in complete agreement with that.
Yeah.
So the question is how do we go around, integrating both into our lives that are actually very effective and lends meaning and purpose to our lives, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the whole thing.
I think one way we do that is by being inspired and learning, and having knowledge and feelings of compassion and love and understanding and appreciation and caring. And when we learn and we cultivate those more, we are less prone to react the other way, because we are able to see, walk a mile in someone else's shoes, or we are able to have compassion for them. But until we grow that inside of our own hearts, and we can't have it for anyone else in the world. So
Yeah.
I think that in my world, in my experience, in the work that I do with Lee and Cryon, and of course the heart math people, that's what we're working on now as a mass consciousness, is how do we bring that heart consciousness into our everyday life, every moment, for ourselves, so that it can come from us. And I'm excited about that. I think there are a lot of people that are feeling the world is headed, down a dark, slippery slope. And there are some, bad things happening all the time throughout history. But I believe we have more connection now to choices about living from our heart and living from our divine self and our own inner wisdom than we've ever been conscious of. And people like you that are writing books like that really help support that consciousness. So thanks for doing this.
Yes, it's the consciousness of compassion, right?
Yeah.
And as when Jesus says, love your enemies, he's really not talking about the people that are like, 50, 60, 70, 80 miles to the east that were like the Carthaginians. He doesn't say, hey, you know what, we should all hate the Carthaginians because they're going to come over and take us, invade us. He doesn't say those types of things. When he talks about the enemy, he's talking about the very people that are surrounding him and that he is encountering. He's always encountering people, and people have certain prejudices against that person. Are you a leper? Or are you a prostitute? Are you the tax collector? Or are you the Roman centurion, right? So the Roman centurion comes up to him and says, hey, I need you for, I can't remember what it was. I think it was because
healing. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one of the children says,
yeah.
okay, so they needed a healing. So he's connecting to each person's heart and to what they need.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what Jesus was talking about. This is what we need, and this is what they need, and this is how I can help.
Well, and it's a universal language too. You don't have to have an understanding of anyone else's family life or their business or their culture, any of that. We all have this heart in our chest. We all have the need for compassion and love and understanding and appreciation and caring and gratitude. We all do. We all want that. Doesn't matter where we come from.
Right. Okay. There's one more illustration about this idea. So Jesus comes across somebody, I think was crippled, and one of his disciples say, "What sin did this person commit?" And he said, "They didn't commit anything. But it's here to let me show you how this healing can work." I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but that's pretty much what it was. So stop judging. Stop thinking because this person is in this particular state that there is something that they have done that's so egregious that this is God's punishment.
Right.
Because you stop that, you got to stop that. And that's what you experience, the shame and the guilt, right? Yeah. Oh my God, there's something very bad about you that you are now in this condition. So
yeah, and that's interesting because we tend in the New Age to look at that as your karma or my karma. When something bad happens, oh, I must have, that's just my karma. But now we're not saying that anymore. We're much more present about, who we are, why we're here, what we brought with us, and then we brought it on purpose, like you said, for a teaching moment or a showing, of someone how you can overcome something, etc.
There's an old saying of Jesus where a woman came up to him and said, and this is, you're not going to read this in the New Testament, But anyway, a woman came up to him and said, "Will you heal me?" And he said to her, what did your sickness teach you? And she looked at him totally just baffled and said nothing. And he says, "Come back when you know what it has taught you, and then I will heal you."
Wow. No, you're right. I have never heard that. Never. So that's, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So I can't take away your karma. You got to learn your own lessons, and then I'll take care of the leftover symptoms.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he was able to, whatever he had, the magic that he had and the connections he had to the divine, he can erase some of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that in and of itself is actually quite fascinating to me. And that's for another book, which I didn't get into his miracles in interviewing Jesus, only because that would take me away from understanding him. So the point was to really understand him. And now I can move on from there into some other subject, of which maybe healings and miracles would be another book to write. Yeah. It wasn't necessary for this one.
One final thing I'd love for you to share is something you said to me about this book, and I totally agree with you that in all the writing that there has been done about Jesus, there is yet to be writing about his personal experience. It's everyone looking at him and interpreting what he's doing and what he's saying, but not what he's going through on a daily basis and why he said what he did and what the politics was like that brought him to say and act in certain ways. And for me, that's pretty fascinating that you chose to write from that perspective, because I don't believe that's been done.
No. In fact, all the books that I've read have never addressed trying to understand Jesus through his eyes.
And the time that he lived in and what was going on and what he was trying to bring. And, we've never looked at that. So I'm excited that that's available now.
One of the principles I learned in this book was one thing reflects another thing. So Jesus's sayings have a lot to say about compassion. So how is compassion not reflected in the society? If there was so much compassion in the society, there was no need for Jesus to talk about it.
Yeah.
So there had to have been a lot of people that were very, very kind of dogmatic, and eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth kind of way of thinking about things. So that in and of itself is kind of reflects the nature of Jesus's society. Jesus is now trying to be an antidote to a particular issue that his society was facing and they were plagued by.
And perhaps that's why now in this society, in these days, we're really trying to focus more and more on being compassionate, because we're plagued by many of the similar things.
The parallels of the first century Judea are very similar to what's going on today in our society.
Interesting.
And the other thing that he found is that the old traditional practices that the Jews engaged in were not very effective to deal with the issues that were at hand. So people were losing, essentially there was an economic collapse in his society right around the time of either Jesus's birth or before he started his ministry. And that collapse caused a great deal of disruption throughout his entire country. And there were a lot of people without money. So Jesus's stories are filled with people working to, feed themselves. And yet the person on the other end who owned the estate, so to speak, the plantation, wasn't paying the workers.
Right.
But we see this over and over again. So
there was
great
economic disparity.
Yeah, there was
similar to what we experience now.
So it was the rich were getting richer. There was that whole aspect, and then the poor were getting poorer. Right. And now there are this high degrees and high rates of people just not knowing what to do and having a level of there was no sense of identity anymore. So all of our practices are for one thing, but now these other issues are invading us and we don't know who we are anymore. So there was very factious. It was Economically, there was a lot of challenges on many, many levels. People were turning their estates, their little farms into like kind of mega farms, so to speak, to
Yeah.
start getting food and whatnot out to the Roman Empire. So they were making money because they wanted to use and cultivate their property in a much more directed manner. So
Interesting, very interesting parallels.
yes.
Well, David, as you go out into the world spreading this message, I wish you all the best. I think it's time, of course. Timing's always perfect. And I want to say, just before we complete that, one of the really interesting things to me in Jesus's mission and ministry was the involvement of the women with Jesus. So we're going to have to come back and have another conversation about that, because I think that it's time.
This is a great conversation and a great topic.
Yeah.
There were 4 women of me. They call it 4 women of means. Mary Magdalene, his mother Mary, Susanna, and Joanna, of women of means that were part of his ministry. And these women were dynamic and powerful women.
So yeah, I think that's another thing that we don't have enough information about. So we'll have another time where we'll have that conversation.
Okay.
And I look forward to that.
And my website is www.davidcollis.com. And the book is available on Amazon. So I hope your audience goes out and purchases my book. It's a great book, great read.
You're going to be doing some book signings also?
Yeah, I'm actually moving, not moving, but I'm going up to the Northwest to Barnes & Noble in Eugene. And so that'll be on the 10th of August. And I'm going to be involved in the a Portland Book Festival the week after. So
okay.
New development. Great. This is new development.
That's wonderful. That's
Things are
wonderful,
moving along and it's exciting.
Yay. Well, we'll talk again soon, and we'll talk about Jesus and the women.
Thank you. Good topic.
Right. Thank you so much, David, and all the best.
I appreciate it.
Okay, honey.
Bye.